Hello and welcome back to another video about decals. This time we're going to be talking about the debuffer decals. Debuffer decals, D's. So the debuffer. So the best way to think about it is like this. So currently we have just the depth pass. This is basically just saying how far is something, you know, from the camera. Now, if we had our decal bounding boxes, you can imagine that in this pass, we just use some basic math using the camera's position in world space, these boxes' positions and scale in world space. And then what we're left with is just a blank, you know, a blank screen with only the decals being shown. Then what happens is that the materials actually read from that screen space buffer. And that's how we end up with the decals on the materials. So the materials don't know anything about, you know, the individual decals. They're just reading from this sort of global pass. So the main benefit of debuffer decals is that we can actually access that buffer in all of our materials. So if we go debuffer texture and we just plug in just the alpha and we put that into a lurp, and we're going to lurp between, you know, whatever the texture of our material is. That's going to be in 0. And then in the B channel, let's just put in, you know, a random color. This can just be, I don't know, blue. Like water. Water is blue, you know. Put that in the base color and hit compile. I've got it around the wrong way. My apologies. Now you can see at first it looks like just regular old decals, you know, they're still red like we specified in the decal material itself. But if we turn off decal response to be none and then hit compile, you can see that we're now specifying what decals do in the receiving material. So you can probably see where this is going. We can now use decals to drive, you know, procedural damage effects and all that kind of stuff. Stuff that we would usually be using Vertex Paint for, except now we're not limited to the vertex density of any given mesh. It's almost like having pixel space or pixel detailed Vertex Paint. Okay, so our example is going to be this little piece of a house. It's got some nice wood painted trimming. It's got just some natural wood here, and it's got like a sort of, you know, a plaster / render right here. So what we can do is we can set up some damage effects, and that can be per, you know, kind of segment. If you're confused about what I'm kind of doing here, I'd recommend watching my reducing draw calls video as well as the switch node video, and that will kind of get you caught up, you know, if you wanted to sort of replicate this thing. So we can just say for the render or the plaster, we can say you should turn into wall 01. So we're going to do a lurp between this and that, like so. And we'll put that into here. Then for our wood texture, we'll just use a, I don't know, just like moss. Moss or grass is always just a good time. So we're just going to do a lurp. We're going to lurp between the wood and the moss normals. We're just leaving the alpha blank for the time being. And then for our colors, we want to, again, do some lurps between, you know, a stony color. And then for the wood, we want it to be a, you know, like an exposed wood color. So we've got all of these set up and ready to go. What we want to do is we want to get our debuffer texture input. Now, when we do have the debuffer, you can see up here, the debuffer texture, we can actually choose between debuffer A, B, and C. So A is just the base color, which, you know, is getting received from the decal. B is the world normal of the decal. Then we've got the debuffer C, which is the roughness, metallic, and specular channels. So this means we don't have to use, you know, the channels that aren't, you know, relevant. It also means that we can set up our decals in specific ways. So if you're not going to be using, you know, the roughness and specular as intended from your decals, we can kind of use them as like data channels. So if we actually switch this to the roughness thingo, just going to get the roughness, which is R, and we're going to use this to drive our lurps and stuff. So the effect that we're going to be using is called a height lurp, which I have a video on if you haven't seen it already. So we're going to get our transition phase value. We're going to multiply it by 2, and then we're going to get our height textures and subtract 1 from them. Right here and right there. Then we're going to add these together. Bam. And bam. And then we're just going to add some contrast to each of them. So let's just add, I don't know, 10. 10 is a good number. So contrast, bam, contrast, bam. And then we're going to use these outputs to drive our lurps. So for the render plaster stuff, we do that, and we do that. And then for all of our wood stuff, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And lastly, hold on, we're going to do this as well. That is an absolute nightmare. Let me just, there we go. It's presentable at least. All right, we hit save. The moment of truth, the moment of truth. Let's grab our bloody decals, in a literal sense. They are bloody. And let's move them over to here. And you can see at the moment it's just doing the usual decal stuff. That would be because our decal response is set to the default decal response. So we're going to go up to here. We're going to go decal. We're going to just set that to none. Now keep in mind, when it does say decal response none, it just means that it's going to turn off the default way that Unreal is going to handle decals. We can still access the debuffer explicitly in the materials. And then all we need to do is go to that decals material, which I believe was this test decal thing. And we want to output the roughness to 1. I'm just going to find a really basic, like, kind of sphere. So this is going to have like a soft fall off. Just multiply it by 0.7 to just bring it down. Just so it's really nice and soft, you know? There we go. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. All right. So if we look at our final effect, if I can remember my buttons, there we go. You can see that this material is now reacting completely differently as we've decided inside the material itself. So this plaster stuff is turning into stone. The wood is, you know, this exposed wood texture stuff, and we're using a height lurp to blend between these effects and stuff. Again, this is a completely pixel space effect, so it doesn't matter that this wall is very low density, but we can essentially Vertex Paint it using, you know, pixel space effects now, which is really, really powerful. Now, another way that we can utilize our decals is to actually just use the original decals stuff, but use a height lerp. So let's go back into our decal and let's just change this back to that explosion. We're just going to be printing the red again. And we could even do the specular and the roughness as well and implement them, you know, in unique ways. We'll forget about the metallic. So let's go into our wall material. And you can see it's a very simple setup. It's just a color and a normal map. Let's access our debuffer like this. And we want to use the alpha and do a height lerp. So again, we get our height texture subtracted 1. We get the opacity or the alpha input multiplied by 2. We add them together and we apply some contrast. There you go. We'll go like 2 for that. Apply the contrast. And then what we're going to be doing is lerping between the original color and the debuffer base color input using this height lerp. So now you can see that this decal is just doing its usual decal thing. you know, depending on the decal's color itself, but it's also reacting to the height texture. So you can see that, you know, if this was a blood splatter, it's filling in the cracks first of our brick material. So here it's especially obvious. You can see that here it's sort of ignoring the you know, the outer bits of our bricks, filling in the cracks until the, you know, the opacity is too strong. So this is just a really nice way to sort of integrate decals more with, you know, the world and the materials that are in it. We could also do the same thing with the roughness and the specular. So we could say, you know, lurp between the original roughness, which would be 1 for this wall, probably, and using this same height lurp output, we are going to get the roughness from our decal. So roughness is the R channel, and we'd probably want to do the same with the specular, which is the G channel, I believe. No, G is metallic, B is specular. You go here, the original was, just say 0. Specular, same alpha, bam. And you can see that our blood is now shiny compared to, you know, the original of the wall. It's kind of hard to see because, you know, there we go. There we go. Now, there is a function called apply decal or apply debuffer. Debuffer. And it takes in a material attribute. So, you know, make material attributes, and you got to put the thing in, and then you can put your debuffers into here, you know, after you've edited them. So you can like take the alpha and, you know, do a height lurp and put that back as the alpha and put that in here. Honestly, I don't like using this. I feel like it's just more difficult than doing it manually. But again, if you want to explore that option, it is there, but it is sort of a lot harder to integrate sort of custom decal behaviors using this. Now, one last thing about using these debuffer decals, you know, if you're doing like height lurp to kind of blend them in, you'll see that the outside of the decal is actually darker than the inside. Now, this is because the R, G, and B channels are all pre-multiplied by the alpha. So the best way to get rid of this vignette where our color has been pre-multiplied by the alpha is to unmultiply it by the alpha. So we're going to get the 1 minus the alpha because this is an inverted alpha for some reason. And then we're going to get the color and we're going to divide it by that inverted alpha. Then we're going to use that in our lurp to do, you know, all the height stuff. We're going to see an issue, which is this, you know, big black bit over here. This is because this is unclamped. So we're going to saturate this and do that. That is to do with like a divide by 0 error. So you can imagine where the alpha is really bright in, you know, the middle, or where it's fully opaque, that is 1. And so we're dividing the color by 1, which equals the color. But as we approach the outsides, where, you know, it would be black, where the opacity is 0, we would be dividing by 0, which results in infinity or undefined. And in this case, it just, you know, it just kills everything in the lurp. So we just need to saturate our colors. Now, another issue that you're bound to run into when you're experimenting with the debuffer is applying the normals. So normals are kind of really tricky to do in the debuffer. There's a couple of ways you can implement them, but you can only implement this in one way or the other. So here we've got just the regular old thing, the old stuff. And then coming out of our normals, we're just going to have a flat, like just a completely flat normal. So if we were to lurp using the alpha between these normals and the other normals, you can see that something isn't quite right. Now, normals are very, very important. You can see here it doesn't look too bad, but if the normals are facing the wrong way, it means that light is going to be reacting very unnaturally in your scene. So in order to make this work like the usual decals work, all we need to do is get the R, G, and B, and we are going to transform world space to tangent space. And that, ideally, should, yes, give us the correct result. And that's all there really is to it if you just want it to, you know, work like a normal decal would. If we put in just a noise normal into our decal, you can also see that, yes, this is behaving normally. Now, one thing that I never liked about decals is that the decal outputs the world normal, and you end up with, like, if you wanted blood splatters to be, like, splattered sideways or, like, you know, at weird angles and stuff, the normals are gonna go kind of wacky if you wanted to print the normals. So another way that you can implement normals is to turn off tangent space normals in the decal itself. So if we do that now, and then we don't transform it from world to tangent space, so you can see now that regardless of the orientation of our decal, it is in the correct space. Now, this is really, really handy when you want to put a decal across, you know, two different surfaces, just for some extra detail and whatnot. You can see that even up here where it's, you know, stretching really badly, the normals are still correct. And it's essentially because we're passing in a normal that's already in the tangent space of the, you know, the thing that it's being drawn to. So if we were to go back and do this the old way, where, you know, tangent space normals are turned on, and we transform this from world to tangent, then you can see that this is, like, never going to look correct. This way is the usual way. So if you are doing just regular old decal, you know, without debuffer, this is how they would be behaving. But with the debuffer, we can just throw them into, you know, whatever the surface is already in tangent space. And if you do want to use, you know, non-tangent space decal stuff like this, you do have to implement it manually in, you know, all of your materials and stuff. So it is kind of niche. Also, keep in mind that you can't do both of them. You have to kind of choose one or the other. And if you use a non-tangent space decal on a mesh that has a material that's doing, like, the normal decal response, let me just go back to here. We'll go decal response, you know, color normal, and just plug in our regular old thing. Then we can see that something's going very wrong. If we look in our normals, you can see that this is just not, this just ain't it. It always thinks that the normals are pointing up. Right, now one last little thing that I want to talk about, I know I've said this is the last thing I want to talk about like 100,000 times, is how you can possibly use the auxiliary channels to sort of determine like the blend type of the decals. Alrighty, so to use two different kind of blend styles, we're going to be using the roughness channel and the specular channel as a sort of like data only channel. So let's get our original decal, and we're going to put in 1 to the roughness, bam, and we're also going to put 0 into the specular, because I think the specular is 0.5 by default. I'm not sure if that applies to the output of a decal, but we're just gonna be safe. So now let's go into our wall material and go to the debuffer decal these buffers. We're gonna choose our debuffer C, and we're going to get our roughness, which is the R channel. So we're gonna mask out the R. Now let's put that into the base color, and you can see this is a representation of just the roughness output of the decals. So let's go and duplicate this same decal, and we'll just put another one up here, but this time we're going to switch it to this one, and this one is going to have the opposite. It's going to have 1 in the specular and 0 in the roughness. Hit save, and you can see that it has disappeared. But let's now go back to our wall material, and we'll start utilizing this properly. So let's just say that our roughness is our regular old height lurp shenanigans, which is going to get our base color. We'll put that into here. I'm going to put the lurp into the wall color, put that into here. And you can see that this one is doing the effect that we set up earlier. So then what we're going to do is we're going to get our B channel, and we're just going to max that over the, the height lurp. And this is essentially just going to say, use the, the soft input, blah, blah, blah. And you can see that right here, it has that kind of soft input. If we go to its material, we'll give it a different color. And you can see we now have these two blend styles. Now you can see when they start to intersect, it's a little bit of a nightmare. It's not as bad as you'd think it would be. If these were in a different sort order, so if we go to sort order and this one's in front, you can kind of see how this one kind of starts to get softened. And that's just the way that, it's just the way that it's going to be. But keep in mind, this is only a limitation if you want to use the color of the decal itself. If you are using, explicit lurps between effects, if you wanted to use your roughness to do like blood, if you were kind of using it as though you were using Vertex Paint, and then you wanted your specular to be like, wetness or something, then you can actually order them by, doing this lurp first and then that lurp. But doing it this way, you do lose the kind of flexibility of having the decal decide what color it's going to be. In this case, we're letting the material, the underlying material decide what color the effects are going to be and whatnot. So, there are limitations to using the debuffer decal, and, you might just want to opt to use the regular decal method. That's fine. But the option is there if you want to do some, advanced decal blending, or if you want to use decals to sort of pass data at the pixel level into your materials, for things like damage, things like gunshots, where you can just have a generic, gunshot damage decal, and then you can let the material itself handle how that should look. So you don't have to actually do any logic like, oh, we shot a piece of wood, spawn the, the wood bullet hole decal. And, there's a chance that if you were doing a wood bullet hole decal, then that wood bullet hole would spill over into the stone, and it would look kind of wacky. By just having a, a generic bullet hole that's, riding to like the roughness or the specular debuffer channel, you can then let the material decide what to do with that effect, just like you do with vertex color and whatnot. So I believe that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful, entertaining, cool, groovy, even. If you do want to support monetarily, you can do so for as little as $1 per month with the rest of the patrons, which is linked below. And I do want to give a very, very heartfelt thanks to all of the patrons and everyone else that just supports by watching the videos. I really appreciate everyone's kind words. And with that being said, we say goodbye. Goodbye.